Once again, welcome to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Maksym Yali, Professor of National Aviation University and Foreign Relations. Maksym, it's a pleasure to have you on again today.
Hi, Errol. Nice to meet you too.
Beautiful. Today I want to go into some detailed things concerning the support of America towards Ukraine and its importance. Recently, Joe Biden was seeking $13 billion for Ukraine defense and an additional $8 billion for humanitarian. And it appears that some American people are disgruntled about the financial support. And we also have a governor, DeSantis, who's running in the presidential election, who is not in favor of giving Ukraine the support that they would need to successfully win this war. Now, we know the importance of Ukraine winning this war. It's bigger than just financial support. It's the ability for democracies to survive in this time and season. We know that Russia, obviously, in their fake mind, would love to rebuild USSR, and that would mean that further wars will go on, disrupting the European nations. Would you care to educate the American people the importance of supporting this war? Because we know for a fact that if DeSantis or, for example, Donald Trump did get back into power, it's going to be a lot of problems. That's Putin's buddy. DeSantis, he is somewhat taking a page out of Donald Trump's book. The nation in America is already split to some degree. Most of them are somewhat in favor of Donald Trump and how he do things. And then the other half is for Joe Biden. They're left somewhat the independent thinking people who could swing either both ways. We want to be very level and straightforward to the American people why it's essential of supporting this war and continue to give favorable support.
Thank you for a good question, Errol. Well, actually, it doesn't matter who wins, Republican or Democrat, if we take into consideration national interests of the United States. Of course, they benefit supporting Ukraine because military potential of the Russia, which was second in the world before the beginning of full-scale invasion. The Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg, said very well about it. It was number second in the world before it started war in Ukraine. Now it's number two in Ukraine in war. So Ukrainian armed forces show very good results and diminish the potential. So Russia is still the only country which can, well, not win, but destroy the United States with nuclear weapons. They have number two nuclear potential in the world. So, of course, to take into consideration, which should also, and American people, that China is watching the development. And of course, it is considered as one of the battles of democracies versus autocracies, just as Joe Biden, when he became a president in 2021, mentioned future conflict. That's exactly what we see. And of course, if China sees that, for example, what is now proposed as the beginning of peace talks and possible decision, so-called Korean variant, that there is a ceasefire and Ukraine does not admit these occupied territories, which Russia has annexed already last year, last autumn, and that's the end of war. But of course, it will mean that China will rather try to bring back Taiwan by military measures. They're training, they're aiming, and it's quite a possible variant. And of course, it depends the reaction of the United States, which have actually obligations before Ukraine, because the United States were one of the main guarantees of its security and territorial integrity when Ukraine gave up third in the world nuclear potential in 1994, so-called Budapest Memorandum. Russia violated, of course, but United States, Great Britain, even China later joined it. So it's about international law, the rule of law, but not the law of power. Power of law, to be correct, but not the law of power. That's the goal of Putin, and he wants to bring back history to the 19th century when there were empires in Europe, the monarchs of which decided which land will be joined to which country, where people, which language they will speak, culture, etc., etc. And of course, as I mentioned, humanitarian aspects, military aspects, perspectives of the United States, of the main superpower in the world. China, of course, challenges #1 place. And of course, United States should show to other partners like South Korea, Japan, which have tensions with North Korea, for example. And China challenges as well. So they watch how United States make their guarantees. Because the United States, as I have mentioned, have guarantees before Ukraine. That's not many Americans know, I suppose, and that what they should take into account. So that's also how United States can fulfill its security guarantees, which play a very important role. Of course, it's just the beginning, and this war in Ukraine depends a lot whether there will be other new clashes between global West and global East in Taiwan, as I have mentioned, Korean Peninsula as well. So there are a lot of risks that other countries like Iran will want to join some territories of other countries to violate, if they understand that the most important is that power, but not law. So that's what's on stake. And American people should, I suppose, know it and take it into account.
Great. Recently, we saw that Vladimir Putin would have met with North Korea President Kim Jong-un, and before that, he would have also meet with China's Prime Minister. Is it not seems like there's a symbolic sign of unity building among, or coalition building among these dictatorial countries? And for some reason, even though United States of America may be a superpower, both militarily speaking and financially speaking, do you think its impact on Russia would deter Putin from trying to go after other NATO nations or the European nations, or even withdraw from Ukraine at this point?
Of course, it matters. That's third dimension, I would say. Second, I mentioned before why it's important. Because, of course, if and what Putin thought when he started this war, he thought, okay, 3 days or 2 weeks, and European countries will not react. And then possibly there are other challenges to NATO states, Baltic states, which have also some territorial not conflicts, but questions in history. So where, for example, also majority of Russians live, Narva, such a town. It's like in Donetsk region how it started the conflict, because there were a lot of people, Russian nationality, who came there to work from the territory of Russia. And they supported this joining to Russia and rebel in 2014. So that's why NATO states are also in danger, and that depends a lot not to allow Putin as the Hitler, if to give historical parallels. In 1938, in Munich, European leaders agreed with Hitler. They just split it, just Czechoslovakia. And Hitler promised that it will be the last. He's just asked. But then Second World War happened next year. So of course, these historical parallels also take into account and ambitions to restore imperial status for Russia. Of course, it's also a very important goal. And of course, to restore this status, they need to occupy Ukraine. They also need to bring back to its own sphere of interests and influence East European countries, just as it was during Cold War. That's why a lot of historians, scientists call this conflict the beginning of second Cold Wars. But now, of course, China plays the most important role.
Yeah, I'm concerned a lot about Putin's desperation. Recently, I think it's a week or two ago, he held elections in the Donetsk area and some Ukraine territorial areas. And in respect to that, the Secretary of State here, Blinken, said that this is some sham. It doesn't make any sense. Now, with that being said, and a lot of his military are dying out every day, over 250,000 people would have killed in the war since it began. Some of the Russians are becoming so smart that they even flee in their own country not to get drafted into a war. He is running to North Korea to get military assistance. He's asking China for military assistance. He is getting crushed with economic barriers against him. This put him in a very desperate situation. And when people get in desperate situations, they can do some very desperate things. And one of the questions I always ask, would he be stupid enough to go nuclear just to prove to the Russian society that he accomplished something? Because I think right by now that the Russians don't really believe that this war was ever necessary. And he's feeding them a lot of fake news and propaganda and so forth. What do you think, or what do Zelensky think of the desperation at this point with Putin? What do you think Ukraine and its allies are prepared to do should he take that next step?
Well, if you mean using nukes,
Yes.
tactic, no, I think chances are very low. There is no need to do it. The consequences are much more serious than possible gains from the military point of view. Even if he uses, it will not mean the end of war, that he wins. Ukrainian will not give up, but there are going to be much more serious sanctions, and even China, who supports Russia diplomatically, economically, the influence of it increased significantly in financial sphere. For example, they give credits Of course, even China will not be able to support and will have to impose sanctions if they use nuclear weapons. Because, as I mentioned, China recalled the last year that they have guarantees before Ukraine, at least in this sphere, not so nuclear weapons not to be used against Ukraine, because, as I have mentioned, it will be a very serious example for those countries which want to gain nuclear weapons, like Iran. Then, if Iran gets it, then other countries, neighbors, will have to, as Turkey, Saudi Arabia, not talking about Israel. So, of course, that's also dimension of Russian-Ukrainian war, very important. But as I told you, I don't consider that there is a serious possibility, at least so far, to use these weapons, taking into account all these things. And Putin mentioned it. So now they say that our counteroffensive is not so successful, at least it is all expected it in Ukraine. So why to use nuclear weapons? If he can use it only when he understands that he is losing this war. For example, Crimea, when we deoccupy, it's a challenge for his power. Then he will think. Now he doesn't have such a necessity to do it.
Okay. Do you think Putin would say enough is enough? And what do you think it would take Zelensky to say, well, look, you know what, it's time to go to the negotiating table? On what premise would President Zelensky go on the negotiating table if that ever happened?
The conditions are very clear. And President Zelensky mentioned it many times, and it's supported by Ukrainian people. To deoccupy all territories, for Russia to leave from Ukraine, including Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk, so which they occupied in 2014-15. So that's the only condition, and of course security guarantees from the United States, from other countries. That's what we're working on, and we hope they will be serious, because we need guarantees this war not to be start again. Because if now, as I mentioned, such scenario, there is a ceasefire, no peace, of course, agreements can be signed, then Russia will produce more weapons, missiles, rockets, and start this war again, just as it was in 2022, because it was already a second military invasion to Ukraine, just full-scale. The first one began in 2014. So they waited, power just increased and started war. And then historically, Polish know it, how it happened, how they lost their sovereignty. And Baltic states know it. That's why they're concerned. So Ukraine should win this war, not another war of bigger scale to begin. Maybe even third world war, if China starts military aggression again against Taiwan, and US have security guarantees. So US should show the world and China that they will support their allies, and that help to defeat them. That's the most important.
Okay. At this juncture in the war, how do the perception of the Ukrainian people look at their future moving forward? Not from a military standpoint, because we saw that millions had fled Ukraine to go into other European nations and so forth. I know you're not a psychologist, but at this time, what do you think is the psychological impact in seeing a beautiful Ukraine coming back alive in the nearest future?
Well, of course, there is serious psychological pressure because war, it's very difficult to live in it. When missiles, just a defense system, shells dropping every day next to you, and you can be killed. So every day, Ukrainians are killed, not only militaries, but civilians. So you may just sleep in bed and not to wake up because Iranian drones would come there, or Russian missile. So that's, of course, and children under such pressure, especially where there were serious battles like my native city, Mariupol, 500,000 people almost were there. And even maybe hundreds of thousands different figures probably were killed. And of course, people who watched it, as my sister, my mother, of course, children, very serious negative impact, stress, and it is going on. To live in this stress every day, to read this news, to get to know that some people, are killed on the war. Of course, it's difficult. It's to worry about your sons, fathers, husbands, which are on war, whether they are fine, alive, etc. Of course, it's a very serious pressure, and it will take a lot of time to recover for Ukrainians from this stress we are experiencing already for almost 2 years and 9 years in general.
Yes. Maybe we're coming down to our last 4 minutes, but I would like you to, in these final moments, speak to the heart of the American people. And we mentioned this earlier. The importance of supporting democracy is more than just the taxpayers' money, is more than just billions of dollars getting thrown behind a war, but it's the preservation of democracy and the essentials of voting for a government that will sustain democracy. We saw 2-3 years ago where we had an insurrection here in the United States by Donald Trump. And we know Donald Trump is a close ally of Putin. He loves Putin. He idolizes Putin. And should we lose our sense of democracy, even though I can say for a fact that it's under attack by the right wing in one way or the other, directly or indirectly, it's essential to keep democracy alive because it's bigger than just the United States of America. It's what keeps the United States and its allies together, functioning as one, that everyone can live a comfortable life in one way or the other. So if you can speak to the soul of American people to make the right decision, and this is not in no way to influence politics, but to understand it's not about just voting for a person because you like them. It's the principle in which this stands for.
Well, of course, I'm not going to ask to vote to make a choice. It's the right of any civilian, and that's why United States is the most superpower number one, because of democracy. But I should remind that this war is not like far away. So very important and a lot of chances here. So if United States should help Ukraine to win this war, not war to come to United States. As I mentioned, there are different scenarios, and if China is involved then in Taiwan, and it plays important role, the results of this war between Russia and Ukraine is first part, I would say, of the bigger conflict scale between democracies and autocracies. Yes, so not to be involved particularly. Now you are involved financially. So even you give us weapons, well, pretty old, you restart your economy, so you benefit from it as well, United States. And of course, democracy is very important, and the biggest treasure any nation can have, as we can see from the level of prosperity around the world.
Okay, great. Well, Maksym, we come to the end of our program. It was really a pleasure having you on. You need to get some rest. I know it's terrible over there. And until then, we'll speak again. Take good care of yourself and stay safe. And for all those who have been tuning in or living in the 21st century, I want to say to you, have a nice day.